Chochu. A highly advanced form of Hakyoko Ken requires strong muscular use of the legs and hips as well as nimble footwork. Only greatly disciplined fighters are capable of using this technique.
What? Want a 1v1?
Some of my favorite games that come out of the 90s era of Sega was their fighting games. There was Virtual Fighter, Fighting Vipers, Sonic the Fighters, and yeah, that's it. But anyway, the important thing about those games is Sega taking inspiration from SNK and made their own King of Fighters style crossover with, the only two fighting game IPs they had, exclusively on the Sega Saturn, called Fighters Megamix. But the crossover doesn't just stop at Virtual Fighter and Fighting Vipers, it's a celebration of the games the development team AM2 has made up to this point. Yeah, I'm pretty sure most people remember this game as that one old fighting game where you fight as a car, but we'll get into that later. But first, let's talk about the two fighting games this crossover is made out.
今までにない64ビット級コンピューターグラフィクス格闘技バーチャファイター
The first polygonal fighting game. The graphics were so impressive for this back in the day that the game inspired Sony to focus on 3D hardware for the creation of the PlayStation. But onto the game itself. The game is a simple 3-button fighter, punch, kick, block. It's just simple old fighting game rules. Damage your opponent until the light bar runs out. Also getting hit with the edge of stage results in a ring out. Virtual Fighter 2 is more or less the same, except for more characters, movesets, and stages.
路地裏のリングで戦いに明け暮れる若者たちいつしか彼らはバイパーズと呼ばれるようになったファイティングバイパーズ
This game is very similar to the way Virtual Fighter plays, but having more of a combo focus since every stage has walls for the characters to bounce off of when they're hit. But you can also get sent flying through those walls if you're hit hard enough. The main gimmick of this game is the armor mechanic. The more harder you hit certain areas on your opponent, the more likely that piece of armor in that area will fall off, leaving the spot more vulnerable to take more damage. Also, the Sega Saturn version of this game is the first fighting game to have a training mode, making this game a hero to the fighting game community. Also, Sonic and Tails were hidden characters in this game. Also in Japan, this game was sponsored by Pepsi.
Win!
So with that being said, Fighters Megamix is a combination of the two, and by combination I mean just fighting Vipers with some arena stages and characters without armor. All the main fighter characters play just like they do in the games they came from. The game includes a full original cast from both Fighting Vipers and Virtual Fighter 2, along with the other AM2 creations such as Rent-A-Hero from the Rent-A-Hero RPG for the Genesis, Janet from the arcade shooter Virtual Cop 2, Kids Akira and Sarah from Virtual Fighter Kids, which is just like a chibi version of Virtual Fighter 2, Deku from My Hero, just kidding, he's not from anything, he's just some abomination made up for this game. Bean and Bark from Sonic the Fighters. You're probably wondering why these two obscure characters instead of Sonic and Tails. That's because Bean and Bark were creations of AM2 who had made Sonic the Fighters as well. And while we're on the subject of Sonic the Fighters, I just want to say how much I admire this game. I think this is the best fighting game to have a cartoony presentation, along with one of the most dynamic looking games for at the time. Heck, I'd say it holds up today still. Saiba, a character who was cut from the original Virtual Fighter prototype, but was added here to be made officially playable. Now if you ask me, that's some pretty good fan service. The AM2 palm tree logo, yes, the logo to AM2 is playable. And of course, the Hornet number 41 car from Daytona, USA. To this day, I think this is one of the most coolest and practical joke characters to ever be in a fighting game. Most of the fighters come with their own stages and music from the games they represent, which is pretty cool. They even put Outrun music in the scoreboard, and that kind of made me happy.
Congratulations!
This game had the biggest fighting game roster at the time, which was a pretty big deal, even though later games in the genre would beat it with more iconic cast of characters. The game will start you off with the full roster of Virtual Fighter 2 characters and Fighting Viper characters. Unlocking all the other characters is a simple process, which is just completing courses. These are a series of fights centered around a theme, like fighting all the girl characters, or fighting all the muscle characters. There is something this game does have that sets it apart from any other game that came out around this time, and that's the ability to do this! Yup, the Z-axis is now official thanks to the new sidestep move, which was first introduced in Virtual Fighter 3, along with some of the game's music, movesets, and victory pose. That's because this game is meant to be a preview to what's to come for the home release of Virtual Fighter 3, but the game never got a home port until the Dreamcast, so this is the most VF3 you'll get on the Saturn.
Fight! Ready, go!
overall, this game is a pretty fun fighter, though sadly it never had an arcade version or been ported or re-released anywhere beyond the Sega Saturn, with the exception of the TigerElectronicsGame.com, which is a very crappy port to a very crappy system. But unless you already have a Sega Saturn, I wouldn't say the game is worth seeking out. If you want a similar experience, I say try the re-release of Virtual Fighter 2, or if you want some Fighting Vipers action, I really recommend Fighting Vipers 2 for the Dreamcast, which is my personal favorite Sega fighter, even though it's hard to come by since the game didn't even get an American release. So I recommend emulation if you don't already have a Dreamcast. Other than that, the closest thing we have to a new Fighters Megamix is Virtual Fighter 5. That game has practically become Fighting Vipers, with most of the stages having closed-in walls to bounce off of. And I guess you can say Dead or Alive is the closest thing we have to a current Virtual Fighter, since they both have the same kind of button scheme. The first Dead or Alive was made on a Sega Model 2 arcade system along with Virtual Fighter 2, and look, they even added Kirin for Dead or Alive 5, so it kinda comes full circle. Too bad they suck at charging DLC though. Yeah, but to be fair, in terms of current 3D fighters, Tekken has pretty much replaced all of them, so here's hoping they add a Sega character in someday. Okay, so yeah, so that's kind of like a makeshift history of Sega fighters for back in the day. I'm not sure if the game was big. I assume it was a decent. I mean, the Sega Saturn wasn't big itself, so it's probably big for anyone owning the Sega Saturn. My favorite game out of all these, I'd say, is in the video is Virtual Fighting Vipers 2. I like that game. I think the game looks great. I think it plays great. It's my favorite Sega fighter out of all of them. But my favorite fighting game of all time is Capcom 3. But that doesn't count because it's 2D, 2.5D fighter. So yeah, something that weirded me out when I was recording Fighting Vipers is, like, I'll show some video on the screen. While I was playing, the game kind of trolled me in a way. So I was playing a match and like in arcade mode, and I was about to get my butt handed to me, and then all of a sudden it says, like, new challenger approaching. There is no second controller plugged in, and all of a sudden, like, it's like a player 2 marker going over the character select, and it's Pepsi Man. That creeped me out, but that was pretty funny. That's cool. That was actually pretty cool. I would like to see another Sega, like, crossover fighter. Doesn't have to be Fighter Megamix, but, like, just like something that crossover, like, all the, because Sega has a lot of characters. I would like to see a fighting game. If they're gonna do racing and tennis, like, that'd be cool for them to do a fighter. Also, my two mains are Akira in Virtual Fighter, and for Fighting Vipers, and this game, the Fighters Megamix, is Picky. Piggy's my main. So yes, if you're ever gonna 1v1 me, I'm going to pick Picky. But yeah, that's it. Logging out, everybody.